Right on. We're ready to talk Georgia.
Finally.
So you've told Sopo that we talk about Bera all the time.
I mentioned in the notes that
I think you underplayed it.
I
you downplayed it.
It's a big thing.
Did you tell her that the Bera's face is one of our Twitch emotes?
There's a lot to explain about my obsession with Bera Ivanishvili. I think it's pretty understandable. It's kind of insane.
He's a king. I don't know. I
want to talk about him. We'll come back to him at the end.
We will come back to him at the end.
I think he represents something about the post-Soviet crisis.
Yeah, maybe you guys can enlighten me because I barely even keep up with it. I don't care at all about Bera. So I'm very curious as to why you guys really seem to love it.
Strap in. I would so love for this podcast to just be us inviting very interesting guests on, characters. And then just for me to corner them explaining Bera Ivanishvili. What is there to explain? The man was born in Paris. He still does a lot of his music and raps in French.
That's true.
He has a TikTok that he supposedly shares with his wife, but she does not use it. Only he uses it.
She's in it though.
She's in it
because they do cosplay.
Yeah. He likes to dress up as anime characters that also have white hair.
What was named first, the song or the party? We have some controversy over this.
Yeah, we don't know the timeline, but you are aware he has a song and record label called Georgian Dream, and it does appear to be earlier than the political party. I don't know if this is widely known.
That's
Getting
funny.
inspired by your
That's
son.
so funny.
The other part is, and I forget the name, but the Secret Service, basically. What is it in Georgia? Do you remember?
I forgot the name, but the where he basically got the National Guard or something, I've forgotten the name, to harass his critics that were mean to him online.
Yeah. That was going around.
Yeah, okay, so we're all on the same page.
All right, so I just have poorly Google translated a Georgian article and misunderstood it. That did happen. Good. All right. I wish my dad would name a political party after my side project.
The Corner Späti Party?
The Corner Späti Party, yeah,
well,
right.
There's I don't know if that's true, but there's also this thing about Saakashvili where his kid was making something with Legos. He was like, that's pretty great. And then he built that. And so
No.
there's a lot of these children and parents and at least rumors that they're being inspired by their children's Legos or, albums
Children
and so on.
That's amazing.
That was wonderful.
I gotta get your ideas from somewhere.
Yeah. Also the current...
My kid's really into Fortnite.
That's not... don't make political legislation awful.
There is an argument to be, you have all this land, you should use it as real... That's a tourist economy. If you want
I think you're thinking of Minecraft.
Do real life
It is
Fortnite.
Minecraft, yeah. Right.
No, people could drop into a section of the country.
True.
Oh, yeah, that's a bad inspiration. Okay.
Yeah, isn't also the current prime minister also majority shareholder of Bera's record label? There's the whole thing. Anyway,
we didn't come here to talk Bera, to talk shop, aka talk Bera.
He also has a Legalize It song, which I guess we can talk about that later. Hey, welcome to your weekly Corner Späti. It's me, Kieran, and I'm joined by Yulia.
Hi.
Nick.
Hi.
And Rob.
Yo.
And we're also joined by journalist and union organizer Sopo Japaridze. How's things going over there? And you're in Tbilisi, right?
Yes, I'm here.
Excellent. Okay, there's a bit of a lag, but we can deal with that. We can do this. So one of the things we wanted to talk about is basically Georgia, the entire country. Let's try and understand it in 1 hour long podcast. I think we can do it. But mostly modern Georgian politics. And I've been listening to Reimagining Soviet Georgia, which Sopo runs, and is a great podcast. I've been finding that very useful, as well as your appearance on that called again? Red Star in the East.
Red Star over Asia, I think.
Yeah. And I would like to basically just talk about, in the light of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, what something similar to that, although not really entirely the same, how that affects politics years after the event. So yeah, I guess the first, how do we want to start this? We want to start with like the very beginning.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to. I think we'll keep going back in time, so we have to stop ourselves. I still like the idea of Saakashvili. I think his era kind of like both what led up to him and what comes after him encapsulate, it seems like, the dynamics of the modern Georgian state. Sopo has a very good article in Jacobin, which we'll put in the show notes about it. But yeah, we have to start with from the very beginning, I guess, of post-Soviet Georgia.
But yeah, post-Soviet Georgia. We can't start the very, very beginning.
No, that would take a bit.
So I'm very curious because this is a character that I've basically, or I shouldn't say character, but a person I've basically know nothing about, which was the very brief leader of a recently independent Georgia. I'm gonna butcher this name. Zviad Gama. Oh God, no.
Gamsakhurdia.
Hurdia. Yeah.
Gamsakhurdia.
Gamsakhurdia.
So Zviad, our boy, first president of independent Georgia, and from a lot of writing, seems to be kind of the beginning of this, or a very strong beginning, or of the like nationalist kind of idea of Georgia, like Georgian nationalism. I'm just wondering what you could tell us about this guy, if anything, Sopa.
Yeah, so Zviad is like, if you read his stuff and you're not Georgian, you think he's a fascist, but like if you're Georgian, you get like romantic like feelings from it, because that's how like nationalism works, right? So like, like Zviad Gamsakhurdia had been a so-called dissident, for a long time. He comes from like a prominent family, or he came from a prominent family. True story, my uncle and he were in a revolutionary organization that tried to, had plans, and they were like 14 or 15-year-old kids, tried to overthrow, at that time was de-Stalinization happening, and they were arrested and then set free. And that was like the first attempt where Gamsakhurdia was like forging himself. My uncle actually was like split off from him because he became so xenophobic and started really this Georgia for Georgians kind of thing. But it's funny because the nationalist movement, it was actually started because of de-Stalinization, this protecting of Stalin's memory from de-Stalinization, and then turned into anti-Stalin to anti-Soviet to then some kind of mythological Georgia that never existed, this like pining for a world that never existed. But that's like a lot of nationalism. Is this some kind of golden era that never happened that you are trying to recreate? And Zviad at the end, he also just seems like an incredibly erratic personality. He started also lashing out at the West as well, and they hated him. He also then started going after ethnic minorities, causing a lot of aggressive acts. There's this incredible video, and I wish everyone could see it. At least, like, I want to translate that. One day I'm going to translate it into English because it is one of the best documents. It's a really long video, like 2.5 hours maybe. It's called Decency Court, I guess, or Dignity Court, where it's about, it's like Zviad and his whole like national movement, and they're like in this apartment, and it's like very, very like post-Soviet kind of apartment. It's actually a little earlier. I think it was before Soviet Union collapsed at that point. But they're in this like room, many of them, like all the bright shining leaders who are now our heroes. and they just scream at each other, accusing each other of being KGB agents. I have never seen anything better in my life. It's my goal. I will sit down and I will translate this because it should be a play. Like, it is incredible. My uncle was there too, actually. I saw him like in the background, but like literally it's like they sit there and it's just like, it's like Zviad's guys and there's like the posing one, like posing guys. And they just like, just do these crazy antics, like screaming at each other, doing like these body whatever, like shaking their bodies in anger and doing these speeches and whatever. It's crazy. It really is insane. And we have never been able to move away from, no, you're a KGB agent in like 30 years. Like literally that video is like, it continues on and on, because if you say anything, somebody will accuse you of being a KGB agent or a Russian agent. And everybody thinks, like, if you ask a lot of Georgian Dream Party, they'll say UNM is actually pro-Russia because they tried to destabilize Georgia and they started the 2008 war to destabilize Georgia. If you ask UNM, Saakashvili's party, they'll say Georgian Dream is a Russian-run KGB like party. And so it's just like, no matter what happens, what you do, everything can be traced back to somehow it suits Russia. So if you're against the war, if you're for the war, if you do this, if you don't do this, and it's like, it's hard for me to take any of those charges seriously. Because every time anyone's ever tried to explain how Russia was involved, they sound crazy to me, because they devolve into conspiracies. And so that's why I have this like a lot, let's say, I have a bigger shield, for when people try to start claiming that somebody's pro-Russian or not. I'm like, just show me the facts, man, like just the facts, because it's often used to smear each other and you just become, I don't know what's going on at the end, just devolves into nothingness.
Can I ask a quick question? What you said about the dissident movement, or I'm not sure, the national movement, starting with like a pro-Stalin position during de-Stalinization. Yeah. Can you explain that quickly? Because that seems like such a strange journey.
It doesn't.
I mean, very particularly Georgian. So. I know, but like that's fascinating.
Well, they took de-Stalinization of Khrushchev as an affront to Georgians. Like, this was an attempt to go after Georgians, remove them from offices, to shrink our influence, because like my co-host and I, in our podcast, we joke like Georgians ran the Soviet Union. You know what I mean? Like, it was like, it was no matter what now that they all say, oh, we were the victims. Of course, everyone's saying that now, but Georgians were a huge part of Soviet Union and they had a huge reach. If you look at nationalism, and this is why a lot of nationalists like Stalin, is because if you don't look at nationalism as only within your borders, confined within your borders, then the Soviet Union was probably one of the farthest reaching nationalist Georgian projects, right? Because it had Georgians like Stalin or Orjonikidze, like Beria. They ran, a huge amount of the globe. They had unprecedented powers. And so depends how you define nationalism and how you see it, but no Georgian's ever going to be as famous as Stalin, right? I mean, it's just never going to happen.
Yeah, no, it's definitely something that's like immediately noticeable if you try to be a bit psychotic like me and pay attention to the politics of like every country in what you could call Europe, and then I just like set up Google alerts for Georgia, and it's always just the state in the US and never the country. So it's very easy to kind of, I can definitely agree with that. But Zviad is this kind of character, and it's really interesting, this kind of like nationalism coming from like a reaction to de-Stalinization. But
they changed their mind. I'm so sorry. They afterwards they start reading, Radio Freedom or listening to Radio Freedom, and then they tell him that Stalin was a bad guy, and a lot of them were like, "Oh my God, I didn't know Stalin was such a bad person," and so they kind of abandon him. It's so funny because this East-West stuff. They're always like Western this and Eastern that. Funny story is that the West are the ones who told people in the Soviet Union that they were oppressed. Like, they didn't come up with this. They literally were told, and then took some voices from the Soviet Union and published them and reprinted them and got those words out, got those stories out, like the famous Gulag Archipelago and so on, and reproduced that narrative of what Soviet Union was. It is, for me, it's 80% a Western project, And so like, it's this interesting thing where they'll claim like, these are the local voices saying this. And it's like, not really. It's sort of like you specifically targeted, had illegal newspapers, had all this like certain narrative going in. You gave power to certain narratives over others. You republished it, you gave it coverage, and you distributed it. And so nothing is authentic. Nothing is this organic, and that's the truth. And that's, we know this. I know this. But like, still this happens again, especially over Ukraine. Is like, why are Western Marxists saying this? And why is the Western left? Like, just ask people only who are in Ukraine or something. That's the agency. Those are the authentic voices. But that's a lie as well. All of this is very much manufactured. It's our good old Chomsky. It's all manufactured consent, manufactured like ideas and narratives. I mean, we haven't moved past that.
Well, yeah, like where it's just like we need to listen to the voices of the Ukraine. No, not that voice of the Ukraine. I want you to listen to my friend.
Only these voices.
Yeah, Gleb Freikorps, friend from Al Jazeera.
We have these certain guys.
Yeah. I think that's also too just because our show is in Germany. And we've noticed that similar, maybe not like exactly the same.
Like American conceptions of what Germany is like.
No, of East Germany. Especially just historical things that then when you speak to a lot of people, I mean, there's obviously a split depending on what the generational gap is.
There are a lot of people who really enjoyed living in the
GDR. Yeah. So when it's like when you're from like, like if you're like, from further west or like the US and you like meet like an older East German, they're like, yeah, it was better in East Germany for like, social like security reasons. Yeah. The average American or Brit just like, has their like hat spin off their head.
Well, like we in Ireland definitely get like none of those like opinions ever made it that far.
Yeah.
But I really do love the like this idea in Georgia of everyone being accused of being like KGB or pro-Russian because it is amazing how that is like weaponized in everything that you could call quote Eastern Europe, because that was the exact same with Babiš in the Czech Republic. Like all the opposition he's not a great person, don't get me wrong. But like all the opposition to Babiš in the Czech Republic was like he used to work for Czechoslovakian secret intelligence or whatever they were called. I can't remember. Okay, but moving on to history. Sviat is only like in charge for 3 years or so. He's taken out in a coup in 92, and then we get someone I believe your podcast called the architect of the collapse of the Soviet Union, Edward Shevardnadze.
Yes.
Excellent. And he's basically in charge for, well, like 1992, officially actually democratically put in charge in 95, and then 2003 he's DC'd with the Rose Revolution. And we kind of opened this podcast with chats of Berat Ivanishvili, but I just want to take it from the Wikipedia that the main reason he was overthrown because he had a government that was corrupt and full of nepotism. So I'm glad that's gone. But yeah, so I'm actually curious, what was his role within the Soviet Union before he came back to Georgia?
Well, he ran Soviet Georgia in the late 70s, I think, early 80s. He actually was one of the so-called Western-oriented voices in the Soviet Union. And even though he's looked upon now as sort of being this, I don't know how things change so quickly, but he was a very anti-Russia kind of person that became now looked upon as opposed to Saakashvili, who came after, as like almost like he was the more pro-Russia person compared to Saakashvili. But he, Shevardnadze was like the guy that kind of brought instability. So after this experiment of having this like rabid nationalist Gamsahurdia, who also just seemed to, not only did he really increase tensions and led to sort of ethnic cleansings on both sides of, from Abkhazia, Ossetia, and Georgia, they really wanted someone who was a more distinguished politician to like calm, which was, I think, a correct decision by the Georgians themselves, who were part of the coup, to like welcome in Shevardnadze, who maintained peace. But let's say, I think Georgia has this like two modes. So they get these like very hot-headed leaders who cause too much change too quickly, and usually often in bad positions. And then they have this opposite pensions, which is like having a more stable leadership that's like neither here nor there, just kind of just stabilizes. And I kind of look at Gamsahurdia as like that kind of adventurous leader, and Shevardnadze is that calming one, and Saakashvili as the adventurous, and Georgian Dream as the calming one. So it's like every time we get like the crazy guy, then we get like the slightly less crazy guy. Like that seems to be the pattern. And then people get bored with stability. So they elect that, crazy guy again. Crazy guy makes things too crazy. So then they like elect the guy who's going to calm it down. And so it just seems like that's the four leaderships that we've had, the four governments seem to look like that. And so Shevardnadze, I think, did good job of calming things down. But what they call corruption. And corruption is like, to me, I don't really like corruption. The way things are framed around corruption, I think, is very alarming because it's often incorrect. I don't know if you listened to our episode about healthcare and corruption and how they made like everything into this corrupt thing. And it was just like, I feel like it just works against people. So they often like go after people. Yeah, go ahead.
It's actually, a situation that also happened in Poland. That like, because a lot of like, things were done like under the table or something like that is how you gain access to certain healthcare procedures, etc. And when that was targeted, especially by like Western-led organizations like Transparency International and stuff like that, a lot of those accesses were gone. Because it was like put under this like corruption terminology.
Yeah, and only the elite stay corrupt. And so what it does is really actually limit access to poorer people. And also just
exactly.
Is it like corruption when, like, example, okay? I like this a lot because this guy said it. He was like, the doctors were, for a long time, they were receiving all these like, and they were gifts. They were just like how can you even call it even corrupt? I'm sorry, but it's like chocolate, okay, and like tangerines and stuff. Like, I mean, it's like, the corruption. And okay, so, and there was of course money too, but often it wasn't like, it really was not as like severe. And then
exactly.
That was like, the doctors decided that they were uncomfortable because they're professionals, right? And they're doctors. So they were like, we don't want to be receiving bribes. That's undignified. We're professionals. So we'll just, so we'll do this. We'll just charge fees for our services. And that's what they did. So instead of like it being bribery, now you paid for it. And that's how they get rid of corruption, is made it legal. Like, called it a fee.
I think
called it a medical fee. Now you had to pay it. And before it might have been like optional.
Was the fee less than a cost of a box of chocolates? Because
more,
I see a glaring problem. Okay, there we go.
I think also, like, I mean, just on the talk of that, then it's like, nations that aren't corrupt, back to Germany especially is one of the funniest, is that
No corruption here.
Yeah, you can
Excuse me?
get money directly from BMW as long as you declare it as a politician.
Yeah.
So there's people who get millions of dollars directly from, coal companies, BMW, that are just directly to their accounts.
Yeah.
But as long as it's just listed of like, yeah, BMW gave me a donation of, 4 million euros, that's then A-okay.
What's always the case when like corruption is talked about with like the post-Soviet states or Eastern Europe in general is it's always like, no, you're like, you're doing it wrong. It's called lobbying. You're like,
Yeah,
Yeah, Germany
yeah.
doesn't even have that though, which is
That's
the
the
funniest thing, is that it's a direct check to you.
yeah.
It's not even like the U.S. where you
Wine
have to
and
do
dine
lobby.
me first.
Yeah. Like that's the thing I just find is the funniest is that then Germany seems like the gold standard of democracy, but it has like the dumbest, just straight up corruption of like elites that everyone ignores.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think privatizing everything they thought was like, oh, it's not corruption now. Everything's privatized and you just have to pay for it. Which led to serious crisis. People couldn't afford it anymore. Couldn't afford many services. And we know very well that corruption stayed and actually got legalized and strengthened at the top. And while everybody on the bottom kind of suffered through that. So yeah, this is how they solved corruption, always at the cost of poor people. And that's why I don't like the term corruption, though I would say probably there was lots of theft during Shevardnadze. Shevardnadze has that politics of like, he just let everybody sort of eat from the pie, to keep everyone happy, and wasn't like restricting it from that or that. And that is also a method of rule, of keeping certain peace.
I mean, that that was always the thing with there's a proper name for it of just like how Gaddafi kept control and stuff like that. It's like just keep the jobs coming and everything's kind of like fine.
I actually have a question concerning that, because like when it comes to the transformation years, like from Soviet Georgia to Georgia now, unions didn't play a big role in that, right? It was more like church and cultural leaders, wasn't?
Yes, you're very lucky in Poland because you actually had, despite what Solidarność is now, you're lucky because you actually had working class politics that was against Soviet. Well, at one point, turned against Soviet Union and socialism, and so you just have the people that were the leaders of destroying the Soviet Union, or at least like maybe not directly destroying, but like part of the protests, are the ones that emerge as the winners in post-Soviet world. So in Georgia, it looks like nationalism and it looks like the strengthening of the church, and which is exactly what we have now. We have church that's really strong, that's always like has really regressive politics. But like people are very poor, and that's like they need spirituality even more because they're so poor and despondent, and nothing seems to ever go right in this country. So of course there are more and more people who never even liked the church have turned to the church as a saving grace for them. And then we have hyper nationalists who are divided both the pro-church and anti-church. And the problem with almost all of this, and I think Ukraine falls into this, is that entire nationhood building of the post-Soviet communist countries has been hating Russia and hating Soviet Union. It's a negative sort of nation building, right? And what happened is everyone sort of cleaned their hands on Russia. Like, they're like, Georgians, we were never the bad guys. Russians made us do it. Like we were the victims. Polish said the same thing. Ukrainians did the same thing. Like we were like, we're the good guys. Russians are the ones who made us do it. And so in this weird way, Russia got like stuck with the legacy of Soviet Union, and all these smaller countries were like, no, not us, which was a lie. Everybody was pretty well, while it was Soviet Union and post, Soviet bloc were present, Georgia was definitely very much a big part of it. And so that's what happened. I think a lot of those politics are never talked about, how it's playing out now. It's like Russia got stuck with the Soviet legacy. Then the whole Like we had an episode on this anti-communist decommunization stuff that happened. And
like lustration in Poland, and
yeah, exactly. It's about going after everything bad being tied to Russia, then saying how World War II, like the heroes, right, of like the ones who defeated fascism, that was the Soviet Union, right? And all of a sudden you have them saying that Stalin was in a pact with Hitler, like that was like the only, like that's like you'd have to be like, I don't know, very dense to really think that was like pact was actually with Hitler and not like trying to keep them at bay because you know you have no industry and Hitler's about to run you over. You know, like, of course that was a pragmatic
Also the
decision.
last country to sign a treaty with the...
What?
The Soviet Union was also the last country to sign a
yes,
treaty
of course,
with
and they
Nazi
knew.
Germany. Like,
yeah, but that's the thing.
Everyone else was.
But there's so much I could talk about that. That's like another episode I could dedicate to me being super angry about that.
Go.
But that's been like but you know, this decommunization, outlawing that and saying that Russia isn't becoming synonymous Soviet Union because all of us were just captive nations, right? We just all fled. Like that's another bullshit. And so we're like, these bad Russians have been, you know, they're actually Nazi collaborators. They have completely and utterly these smaller countries, especially like Poland, Lithuania, at least Baltic states. They have been leading the charge to take away even their notions of heroism. That's the only thing Russia has been, just like Georgia, well, not as bad, of course. Russia's super rich compared to us, have been completely bulldozed by neoliberalism, right? And like that's the only thing that these people have got going is like some kind of notion, at least where the good guys defeated World War II, and that's been even taken away from them. You know, like there's a lot that is happening, and of course we're told, you know, 30 years we're going towards Europe and we're going to be saved, and we have a bright future because we're bright, wonderful, democratic people who just love entrepreneurship, right? Like we have this story about how awesome we are. And that's just, it's crazy. Like all of this is just like, I'm just like watching everything. I'm like, what is wrong with everyone? Has everyone lost their mind? Like it is so obvious what has been happening and how everything has emerged, you know? And this denial of this. And it's just like, oh, Putin's just insane. Like nothing happened, you know? Like, oh, and everyone's a victim. And it's just like, yeah, you can condemn actions. You don't have to justify things, but we should really look at what's been happening. You know, there has been a lot, not just territorial. I think it's easy to focus on this territorial stuff because I think it's like hard to say you have been morally, you know, bankrupting us for a long time, you know, saying like you have tried to take away our sense of self. And you have been focused on punishment, and this anti-Soviet stuff has leaked into now sort of blaming everything on Russia, where it's like the Soviet Union was the one that they really were after, but the Soviet Union hasn't been around for 30 years. They had to sort of find somebody to like stand in for all this.
Yeah.
You know, somebody to blame and somebody to convict, you know, and all of the nation building has been that we are victims. And then the Western funds keep rolling in to do more and more, you know, excavations of mass graves, right? Like that's all Soviet like research is, finding graves and saying Stalin killed people. Stalin, who has been clearly no longer Georgian to some people, right? Referred to as Russian often. Like, I don't even know how this stuff works. Like, who gets to be Georgian? Who's Russian? I don't know.
Well, that's it's that bind that I feel like a lot of the Eastern European countries post Soviet Union were like put into, of like building this national identity that like, because the anti-communism was so built in, like had to ignore what, like about 60, 70 years of its history. And just
that's why you go back to the great
interwar.
mythological times that never existed, like
but
Hungary.
Like, when you focus on like what a lot of the Central European countries do, of like focusing on the interwar period, you also have to like deny what happened in World War II, because all those national heroes during the interwar period start doing pretty dodgy
Except
stuff.
for if you're Polish and you make this video, the Unconquered.
With Sean Bean.
Yeah.
I think one of the weirdest things too about that as well is this like bizarre false, I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, but there's this really interesting thing when Yulia lived in Latvia, and every time like visiting, you always hear this narrative in the West continuously that then every country that was a part of the Soviet Union didn't have culture anymore. They were like Russified. But then that I'm sorry, they had their not like I get that the governing structures of the Soviet Union were centralized around Moscow to some degree, but they still did everything in their own language. They still did cultural things, still were very much Latvian or Lithuanian or whatever, possibly changing to some regard depending on who was the head of the Soviet Union. But there is a massive, that's the one thing I just don't understand of all this is that then they're this robbing of culture that kind of never actually does happen is then in this made up Cold War period as well of we were never actually Latvian. It's okay, well, the independent country of this may have not technically existed. It was a Soviet republic, but it wasn't, there was a purging of everything that then was not Russian in these cultures either,
yeah,
especially in the sense too of Ukraine's a great example of how many people who are Ukrainian end up in the upper echelons then too of the Soviet Union are proudly Ukrainian as well. I don't know. The whole narrative around itself then is built up, I would argue, probably also primarily by the West. It's so easy to when you do scratch the surface of it, it's oh yeah, you're just looking for this mythical, magical, other that exists that's either ancient history, ultra nationalism, or yeah, like you said, the heroes of don't look too much into them. What are they really doing in World War II between the years of 1939 and 1945?
Yeah. So I think that before we go to the Rose Revolution, I think Rob has one very...
Yeah.
No, I just wanted to ask real quick because it was in your Open Democracy article, which is the story of Hillary Clinton's brothers and the deal with the local governor of Ajana, is it right?
Ajara, yeah.
Ajara, yeah. Yeah, thank you. About the, and I have to double check here,
Hazelnuts, wasn't it?
hazelnut processing business.
That's a big business.
No, I'm sure.
Before we go into that particular story, that's the only reason they kind of entertain Turkey joining the EU is because Italy keeps insisting on it because Nutella. Because Turkey makes all the hazelnuts now, and the richest company in fucking Italy is fucking Ferrero. But sorry, I'm here. I want to hear the story.
No, could you explain that? What it stuck out to me as, okay, this is the 90s in Georgia, but I want you to just explain the anecdote, or also what should we take from this period in the 1990s with this, I don't know, strange geopolitical, but also I don't know, business interests, I guess, in these elite hands.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact details of that, but I'll tell you exactly the tendency, which is, Clinton's administration was very much tied to post-Soviet getting rich quick. Kind of a lot of the I wrote about. I think maybe it's in that article, but I wrote about the Frontera Corporation, this American oil and gas that's here, that was actually started by one of the advisors, and who had made this entire pipeline to evade Russia as a strategic move, let's say. So it was a lot of mixture of this anti-Russian, especially in Georgia and Azerbaijan, right, in this area, Caucasus, was this a little bit of strategy, trying to keep the Cold War alive. And this was actually Shevardnadze's advisor that came up with this whole pipeline. And then also having, business deals like the hazelnut business and trying to control some of that oil and make that money off it, who then ended up Azerbaijan nationalized oil. It was no, you're not getting any of this, very smartly, of course, despite Azerbaijan being a pretty terrible government. But they nationalized, and that's smart. So should have Georgians, but Georgians didn't have much oil either. There was not that much oil and gas in there. And then it became a quick, it was a pyramid scheme. It was pump. It's called pump and dump, actually is the correct term, where you convince investors there's more there, so they invest, so you make more money off the stocks instead of the actual oil. And so that's like in that vein, where you also probably know about the Harvard consulting, right, in Russia, how they stole lots of money and knew about the corruption. Do you know about this incident?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You should look it up. The Harvard consulting, that was like they sent in their finest, right, American top, economists, business people to help advise a transition, to a free market economy. And of course, they were all stealing as well, and knew about and looked away from all the corruption now that they have a problem with. And that's just what everyone was doing. It's like, I call them the carpet beggars, like in the South, if you know, after a civil war, all these Northerners descended on the South to take advantage of business and like sort of exploit the post-slavery South. They were called carpet beggars. And so I call Americans carpet beggars that came in trying to make quick bucks, use local resources, local knowledge, and then at the same time pretend they're somehow spreading democracy, right? And that's what's been the legacy over here. This idea that somehow like Russians or Georgians are naturally corrupt is a lie, right? Can you imagine not knowing anything about free markets or anything about capitalism, really? You live in a Soviet Union. One day it's just close up shop. And then all these people come as advisors and you trust the West because you think that you've been told that they're the good guys. And they start advising you and they start telling you should do this, you should do that. Some people are Hillary Clinton's brother. Some people are administrators. Some people are in Harvard. And that's the legacy. And somehow all of this has been lost. We can't even talk about that anymore, But that's what happened.
There were actually situations where people would because they were seeing what these advisors were doing, how they were meeting. It wasn't, I can only speak of Poland right now and Czech Republic. They would dress up in fancy suits, like the advisors that were sent by Washington to advise for for the transformation time. And then people would also start dressing up in suits and go to these advisors and play advisors basically to get because they would get funding that way, So
this is Rob's. Whenever we talk about the richest guy in an Eastern European country, it was the competition of who could do a handshake the best.
Yeah, I like the idea of just all of Central and Eastern Europe just doing the plot of Catch Me If You Can, just 1,000 times over.
Yeah, I mean, a handful of people did. Even the Austrians did that until they invented Red Bull. The richest guy in Austria was a guy who smuggled in casino machines to Austria. It's all scams. Yeah, so
thankfully one man put an end to all of this.
Yeah.
Mikhail Saakashvili.
Yeah. This I guess leads us to the Rose Revolution, which
kind of a romantic name actually.
It is a romantic name, but I looked up its name.
Yes, he literally
I know what
gave
it's
a
based
rose.
on,
Yeah, it's the most theater kid thing I've ever heard in my life. It's just
Dude,
he storms
Georgia
into a
is literally theater kids. That's what Georgia is.
All right.
Storming the parliament with a rose.
Episode title. But he
It's actually the Rose Revolution.
It's only rosé if it comes to the rosé region of France. But okay, so this is one of your important color revolutions, one of the early ones, if I'm not mistaken. And so yeah, I guess this is a revolution. We can kind of talk about what this revolution supposedly stood for, but I think this is probably as good a time as any, as Rob has alluded to, introduce the character that is Saakashvili. How do you describe this man other than Georgian Andy Garcia?
God.
He's a dead ringer. That was good casting.
So Saakashvili is I mean, I don't know. He's kind of like Trump, but less funny,
Oh,
That's unfortunate.
Yeah, because Trump's the only redeeming quality of Trump that he's hysterically funny. But
Great poster.
So he's like like he comes in as a status. What's interesting about him is I think I wrote about this. I forget the things I write. But it's like he's a statist at first, and he slowly becomes more like libertarian oriented. I think because he's just, if you understand his character now, is like you gotta just, he puts the feels out for what's dominant globally, and he sort of pivots to that. So he's kind of an opportunistic status kind of guy. Because at first he comes in, I think he even like threatens, like has like a very like a tense discussion saying to, I think to US like BP pipeline stuff, where like he says like, do you think we're just like a banana republic? Do you think we're just gonna do what you want? And then he literally becomes that, because he realizes there's no other way out, like he becomes more and more. But he does this thing where Misha knows, where we always say this difference between Dream and Misha is that Misha knows that you have to show the West what they want to see, but behind the scenes, you do the real work, And so he would do all that, like, yeah, I see I'm doing everything you said, but then he would actually have funds. He was like, through like taxing and what's called beating up or whatever, threatening businessmen. He was like extorting money from other people, creating a fund when he needed it, use the repressive state apparatus. But he also would give regular raises and have like not on the books, like help for people. And he would do things that were not on the books. And in some ways, actually, we're not that bad, right? Like you should be, at least if you wanted to do a socialist or leftist perspective, you could do the reverse model, where you show you're doing all this to the West, but then do better things behind the model, right? He was just doing worse things, but he also understood that you couldn't actually develop a country with libertarian and neoliberal prescriptions. He knew that was never going to happen. So he was doing that just to show it, while he was actually building a much more statist, interventionist, I would say, things behind the facade. But also he didn't have that much time, and thankfully, and he also just, I think he got a lot, he was already seemed unstable, but the man is a very unstable personality, like I'm not sure how much he can really do. He seems to have his own personality that needs a lot of attention. And so there seems to be this like idea that I think he actually did want to do things for Georgia, but I think his own personality of being kind of nuts, prevents some of those things. And so, yeah, he definitely pivoted. But Bush really helped, like the neocon really changed a lot of things. Like that was during the ascendance, or maybe the last of really neocons. And, they were really looking for that kind of, they love that underdog story. God, have you seen McCain or Bush? They get they just love the underdog. Little Georgia being attacked, little Georgia. We're all Georgians now. Like they love that stuff,
Didn't he declare McCain a national hero or some shit like that?
Probably. We have Georgia Bush Highway. We have Condoleezza Rice Way. We have like all these streets named after. But there's you gotta have something for your theories. So like Georgia Saakashvili was like perfect for them, and he was just it's funny because Misha is like so open. He literally says everything that is in his head. He doesn't lie. He said, I would have been a nobody lawyer in New York. Now I'm the president of Georgia. I could do whatever I want. I can meet all these famous people. I mean, like, he's like, he clearly realized that, like, you can have, he didn't want to just go down to just history with nothing, right? He wanted a legacy. And so you have to, like, understand how people are. I always pay attention to what motivates people. Is it money? Is it legacy? It's like that kind of stuff is really important. And I think with Misha, it's like legacy and a lot of attention and obsession with. It's a narcissist, classic narcissist, I think. So he creates a tempo that you feel like things are changing, right? And so if they're changing or not for the worse or even if they're changing, you don't really feel it. Like, you don't know, but you feel things are moving because he's giving you that. He's making new buildings, he's putting on fresh paint, it's on the front only, not the back, but he's making you feel like Georgia's changing. And I think people needed that. Like, looking and listening to my relatives who are all like terrible politics, all my family, but listening to them, it's like they felt very lethargic and lost. And so people who weren't getting by during Shevardnadze, and plus there was like not steady light. It's like they didn't actually have electricity all the time. There's a lot of hardship. So they needed to feel, even though it wasn't real. So the perception of movement sometimes is more important than actual movement. And so like, I can understand why he was very popular. I can understand why people like him, but he is one of the worst reformers that not only destroyed progressive taxation, labor laws, all of the institutes that were really important for workers. He that decommunization, he made illegal hammer and sickle, communism, all of that. So like a horrible figure. But I can also judge him on why he could be very popular and why people liked him. I wish more people were able to have an objective point of view on people they didn't like. but here we are,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, he was quite charismatic, wasn't he? Like, he was able to... He was a guy that went to Adjara and actually mobilized people over there and finally got the regional guy out. I forgot his name. Sorry.
Yeah,
the head of Adjara.
And actually also got people like coming to like the capital and actually like protest and stuff like that. So he seemed like to really be good in movement building.
He also like very successfully swooned like the entirety of the West. Because he spoke English. And
oh my God, it wasn't that great. Dude, the West has to have higher standards, though. Come on. Like, how easily do these people get fooled, though? Like,
so easily.
It takes nothing.
They love Navalny. I mean,
you're just like, I love McDonald's and America's Coca-Cola is great. And they're like, he's one of us. Like,
I smoke Marlboro cigarettes.
I like this Russian guy who's speaking about corruption the whole time on his own YouTube channel.
But you're right. This is 2003. This is the rise of the neocons. This is like what it took.
There was like into Tiranovskaya, so I mean, come on.
Yeah, it's a whole thing.
Oh shit! I completely forgot that she was the end speaker for the CDU's party conference.
Just gonna ask
Tishanovskaya. Yeah. Oh, they love like Europeans and Brits and Americans love anyone speaking horrible English, because one, it makes them feel really good about themselves, and two, then it just justifies their bad politics.
But it's totally tied to language though, because all I can think about is the fact that like, okay, yeah, he had terrible English, but it was enough to swoon like George Bush and Condoleezza Rice. But at the same time, like before February of this year, every analysis of like Ukraine crisis was like pro-Russian equals speaks Russian. That was like literally their like analysis. Like there was so many maps that would just label Russian speaking areas of Ukraine as pro-Russian rather than like, no, they just speak that language. They might have different beliefs.
I mean, Zelensky speaks Russian first.
No, he speaks English first.
But like, I always wonder, sorry to cut you off. I always laugh at these like really idiotic differentiations between like a Western type of person and the traditional or Russian or Soviet, whatever they say, the progressives and the regressives. And I'm always like laughing because Georgia has this constantly. The entire politics is based around this progressive versus regressive. And I'm always like, are you serious? They're like, colored hair must mean progressive. You're like, like traditional clothing must mean regressive. Like if you know English, you are progressive. If you don't know English, you speak Russian, you are regressive. If you like sushi, you're progressive. If you do not like sushi, but like traditional dumplings, you are regressive. And I'm always like,
so if I speak English, but I say a lot of racist stuff.
But then you progress.
I'm progressive.
I'm keeping score here. I don't like sushi, but I really do like Georgian dumplings. So
regressive.
Oh, shit.
Regressive.
I really do like the dumplings as well.
They're so good.
I do speak Russian.
Regressive, yeah.
You would be like,
hair.
you would like break the system. You know what I mean? You're like, what is she? Like, I break the system because I'm like
Pink
American
hair,
raised.
eat sushi.
Yeah.
And I'm like, everyone's like, how am I not like a bleeding heart American, like running around with my flag or something? You're like,
right.
So like, and I'm like, I always joke because I always get mad at like the homophobic people because they'll be like, we don't mind gays, we just don't like it when they have earrings and colored hair, like that's like their thing. And I'm just like, that's so dumb. What's wrong with you? Because like a lot of my friends don't have any of that and they're gay, right? And they're like, but this is like they think like colored hair, like certain clothing is like a Western like LGBT propaganda thing. And then and I think that's so crazy. And then you ask people who are literally look like colored hair with like or gay or whatever or just not or just like into like club music or something. And they're like, oh yeah, that person shouldn't be let in this club because they look too traditional, And it's like everyone actually plays along. It's not just this one type. Everybody, like from both, like everybody's in like the cultural divide. They're all playing their parts, and it's like really difficult to move forward. And all of these things also play up into a lot of protests. So people are like, hey, I like, I don't know, Metallica and like hip hop, or actually hip hop is more regressive in Georgia. Regressives like hip hop. Techno music is progressive here. I have to be like Berlin. Like Berlin is like, so techno like is like, and you're like, well, if I'm young and I'm also like a feminist, or I don't even know, I'm not maybe a feminist, but I'm like, oh, I'm just like, 18 and just like think like women rule or whatever, women power. I've heard it like everywhere on Instagram. And I like to wear, like short skirts or whatever it is, right? And then you're like, oh, I must be a progressive and I should go to this protest because that's all the progressives go to this protest and they should have this politics as well, And this is how like Georgia's divided, and that's how it actually works.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
It's so much simpler. I yearn for it. Okay, so unless there's anything, the only thing I wanted to say, we're getting a bit all over the place now. I think we can move to, because we've talked about Saakashvili, the 2008 Russo-Georgian War, which I think as a pretext we kind of have to explain. We've talked about Adjara, but they actually don't play a huge part in this as far as I know. We have to explain Abkhazia and South Ossetia as these, if I'm not mistaken, two autonomous, they were ASSRs in Soviet Georgia, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Yeah,
I believe so. I think they both had the same status. Yeah, because Adjara didn't have that status; it had lesser status.
Right.
Because Adjara is just like Muslim Georgians. It's a little different.
Yeah. Like I was looking at a language map and but
But the language thing is also strange because there's Migrelians and Svans who are considered Georgian, and I don't understand one word of their language.
Yeah, the language map of the Caucasus region is terrifying to look at. I'm sure it works or whatever, but whereas Abkhazia and South Ossetia, like Ossetian is like related to Kurdish. It's like an Iranian language, and then Abkhaz is a Caucasian language that's like all the languages it's related to are in kind of like Dagestan kind of region of Russia. But so the issue then is then when Georgia becomes independent and Georgian nationalism kind of takes over, there's a great deal of political movements that don't view want a kind of centralized country where the autonomy of these regions is basically not respected. Is that a fair description of what kind of leads to this?
Yeah, I think as a rise of hyper-nationalism in Georgia, you can also say, to be very generous, there's also nationalism in Ossetia and Abkhazia as well, because a lot of nationalism was being mobilized against the Soviet Union, right? So it was like, because they had this internationalist or the Soviet citizens, so a counter to that would be to be Christian, a religious counter, and to be Georgian or Ossetian or Abkhazian. So yeah, definitely, it's a time of like hyper nationalism being very much, strengthening of nationalism on both sides. So Georgians did Zviet Gamsa Khurdia kind of, he stoked a lot of the problems by doing some actions against Ossetians, like charging on their entrance with thousands of Georgians that felt like Ossetians felt like that was threatening. There was like a lot of things that happened. Then it ended up in so once you have neighbors like burn each other's homes down, and kill each other and slaughter each other, I just don't think you could really go back from that. Like there's something that happens that's so broken that just can't be explained away. And I think that it's still after it's 2022, and it's been like over 30 years, and still there's this inability to really confront what really happened. Georgians don't talk about it. They just blame Russia. And I think that's a really unfair thing to blame fully, right? Because the responsibilities also lies on the Georgian side and also on the Ossetian side as well, because it was pretty horrific. I think, again, I've translated oral histories from 2008 war, and I also translated some earlier. And I learned a lot from these oral histories, actually. I learned the most from them. That's where I realized, I was like, wow, everything I'm hearing on the news or discussions have nothing to do with what happened because people have such a different, the way they tell the stories are so different. Almost always it's Ossetians and it's always like, the neighbors, a lot of them really love each other. There's like so much love between Ossetians and George. They live together, and they say it was the outsiders, like Georgians, coming in from Tbilisi and agitating people. And a lot of them talk about this instant nationalism that emerges, where people are like, how did you change your mind so quickly? When did you become like this? Like yesterday we were all singing and dancing together, having supra, eating. And all of a sudden now we are like, there's this uneasiness, being like, oh, you're Ossetian, you're Georgian. And so there's this stuff that happens. And then a lot of times also Ossetians would try to, whenever some hooligan, some kind of undesired person, like that was like a 15-year-old, there were always kids, like 14, 15 years old, who burn down Georgians or even vice versa houses. Neighbors would actually try to put them out, they try to help each other as much as they could. So a lot of this stuff happened. And then, there was just even looking at war now, there was a lot of, fog of war stuff. So the Georgian side would say Ossetians just murdered and raped young girls. It could be completely unconfirmed. In the same event that may or may not happen, then the Ossetians would say Georgians have raped Ossetian girls, which would just make each other crazy, right? They would just so then people would start shooting their friends or their neighbors in retaliation. Some insanely bad things happened very quickly, might I add. And now looking at the situation now, I'm like, oh, I could see how this devolves very badly. So this had happened in 2008. Was another time that this happened again, where there had been Ossetians have been trying to get also Russian attention as well. It's just because they're they have Russia as a protectorate, it doesn't mean that they're getting enough attention. And I do think partly that was also what was needed, because Ossetians also have agency, which is this talk, they also are trying to lobby Russia against Georgia, right? they're trying to do the same thing that Georgia's trying to do against Russia and Ukraine is doing or did before, all this happened. So there's definitely a lot of smaller nations and smaller people trying to use bigger powers to play each other off. Like that's just very basic and has to be acknowledged. So 2008 war, I think, has an international setting where it's like February. They had Kosovo declare independence. There's NATO talk, a very sort of overly confident president, Saakashvili, who I think might have thought, like we all think that he might have thought that US was going to be on his side. Like, because there were clashes. He just escalates what was already happening, but he does escalate it. He does think he can take Skin Valley back. And he does try, that ends very badly for him. And it's like, I just learned when I had this great African professor and he taught me, he's like, never trust the Americans, what they tell you. He goes, they told Saddam Hussein he should invade Kuwait. And they didn't know, like Saddam thought that he had the green light. And then when he did invade, he was like surprised himself. Apparently. I don't know. He taught me this like years ago when I was like younger. And after that, I was like, never trust, like make sure that when you do anything militarily, that you actually have the backing that you think you have, because because a certain advisor, a certain like ambassador can tell you something. And then later on you find out you're on your own. So that's why I'm like, did Misha actually think he had the backing? Maybe.
I think it's very reminiscent of something, the whole promise that was made to the former Soviet Union of NATO would never go like an inch east, which is always get it in writing. Always
right,
get this in writing.
Yeah, exactly.
Can't prove that now.
Don't trust what a random guy named like Dylan, who comes in a Hawaiian shirt, who's just on the front lines with you, who doesn't speak any other language but English, is telling you what to do. I mean, yeah, I think that's like, that's one of the things I'm really curious of is, 30 years from now, what is history? I mean, like, particularly of the Russian invasion currently happening right now, is that like, because I covered this for work for like months, especially of like, the violations of treaties from both sides that were avoided by everyone in the media except for those who were having to report on it. Until then, all of a sudden, then like the Russian invasion did happen. And I'm really curious in the sense of exactly that of, don't trust the Americans, is that what's the entire story behind all this and then leading up to it? Because given Russia's invasion is like absolutely like still bonkers to me at the end of the day, but I still don't believe.
Are you saying Ukraine or in Georgia? I'm sorry, which?
No, the current situation just currently in Ukraine. Sorry, I should have specified
confused for a second. I was like,
no, yeah, no, it's perfectly fine. I didn't specify at the beginning. But yeah, I'm very curious in like 30 years, what to then like what are we then going to uncover in the sense of like, whether it be like declassification. I mean, because like think about in like the Vietnam War, there like the declassification of the like Gulf of Tonkin came like 20 years later in the Pentagon Papers? No, like 8 years later. But still, like, like there is like a lot of the stuff that then like the U.S. does to either push a country into war or push itself into war is always omitted from histories until, decades later.
It's a very uncomfortable tactic, but it's one that seems to be working for it, is if you mention this stuff 5, 10, 20 years after the fact, it turns out no one cares.
Exactly, yeah. And I'm not like, again, like I'm not saying I have any of the answers or whatever, but I am curious of how the U.S. is involved in the escalation, because it seems like that is massively a story that then is untold.
It's something that I've mentioned on the podcast before about like this compulsion I think a lot of people have in a moment like this with the invasion of Ukraine to like try and pay attention to everything, to like keep up to date, and
you'll drive yourself insane.
You will. You'll see horrifying stuff that you're probably not prepared to see. And the example I give is actually with the Russo-Georgian War, where like major publications in the West had to retract stuff like a year after the war happened. Like this is not like, and yeah, the internet is made this a lot worse in many ways as well. But I don't want to fixate too much on the war because it's upsetting mostly. But I am interested in how this affects politics modern day. But I think before that, I do want to talk about a movie that I only found out about because of some of your writing, which is, I believe in Georgia it was called, it's an American-made movie before we get started, but like it was called 5 Days of August in Georgia, but an international release was called 5 Days of War.
How could they change it like that?
5 Days of August sounds like a 500 Days of Summer kind of indie rom-com.
Because people like war movies, that's why.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's
people get off on war.
I haven't watched. I only watched the trailer. I haven't had time to actually watch the whole film yet. One of the narratives that I find very hard to believe is centered around a journalist, but like the people at the station are like, no one's paying attention. The Beijing Olympics are on. I'm like, what? No, I'm sorry. Like, not that many people watch the Olympics. I think a war would take precedent. I don't know. But Andy Garcia plays Saakashvili, which he's not in the trailer a lot. I don't think they could actually afford to get him to say stuff. But I think my two favorite pieces of information about this movie is it never got an official in Georgian language DVD release, not even subtitles, even though it premiered in Georgia. And then the second of all, that like Saakashvili denies putting any government money into this, but like one person from his government and another person from his party are credited as producers. See, is this movie at all acknowledged in Georgia? Because from my perspective, it feels like way too soon to release a movie about a war. Like there was 1 year between the war happening and then them making a movie.
Well, I was not in Georgia during that time, so I have no idea what it was like. So I come in mostly after during the Georgian Dream period, where sort of Misha is like known for, raping little boys in prison. So not so much pro Misha stuff at that time, though now he's been rehabilitated, I think, so much. And he came back and, I don't know if you know the details of
yeah, he came back and then he was arrested.
I got, the only thing that makes me happy lately is knowing he has severe FOMO. Because
yeah. Which I think, this I think leads us quite nicely into present day Georgian politics. For those who maybe don't know, could you describe Saakashvili's FOMO? How is this manifested?
It is everywhere.
He's somebody who, if you see him, he does these crazy antics all the time. He did it in Ukraine. When he became a politician in Ukraine. If people don't know that, it's kind of a crazy journey. Governor,
Governor of Odessa.
And then he was part of this.
Yeah, he was stripped of.
Sorry.
Go on.
He was part of this reform council or something. I can't recall exactly the last thing. Zelensky had appointed him as some kind of reformer. Anyway, so a very strange journey. So that just means the guy is in some ways you can say, wow, he thinks of this whole thing as a regional solidarity, but it's this whole thing of how he envisions himself as now as this sort of anti-Russian, anti-Putin crusader. He still styles himself as, I'm the guy Putin hates the most. He really likes that. He calls everyone Russian or Putin. He was attacking his guards, saying that Putin's slaves or something like that. So he's somebody who's obsessed with himself, obsessed with these theatrics. He's the ultimate theater kid. And so he snuck back into Georgia, got himself arrested, was happy as hell to get arrested. That's another weird thing. before he gets arrested, he goes, guys, by the way, meet my Ukrainian girlfriend. We're going to get married soon.
Ooh la
Forgot
la.
about, but then everybody was like, aren't you married? Like, to someone else? Like,
to this woman from the Netherlands.
Yes,
Okay,
Sandra. Yeah. So she's like loved. By the way, she's very loved. So his wife is like this
The people's
dignified
princess.
lady who everyone loves, really. Like, well, if you like the political party. So she actually learned Megrelian, like this like dialect, which should be its own language, not dialect. But anyway, so she's very much admired. And also it's a traditional country where nobody likes like marrying your lover. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing is not like looked upon as a good thing. They're like, have your lovers, but could you keep them out of sight kind of country? And so all of a sudden,
hang on, I feel like this is... I'm sorry, I just want to say this sounds like he's trying to rebrand Georgia as not Eastern European, but Southern European. This seems very...
I'm listening.
Yeah, because like the president of Portugal has his mistress, but he still hasn't divorced his wife yet because he's just like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm a good Catholic boy. I'm never touching my wife ever again. But
no, he said, I'm going to actually start a family with her. So that actually dropped his ratings. They were like, ooh. Then... plus it was like the worst nightmare of every Georgian woman is like a beautiful Ukrainian girl. I mean, like, because the entire like Georgian men talk like their entire fantasy is Ukrainian Russian women as being a lot more beautiful or sexier or easier, whatever, like their understanding than Georgian women. So Georgian women are already feeling like threatened by blonde, beautiful, because they're told blondes and beautiful are beautiful, darkies, us, we're not as beautiful. So there's already a severe threat, right? Imagine. So you're bringing this like woman, this like absolutely like stereotypical Ukrainian woman. And it's like, she's gonna be my wife. And so yeah, everybody doesn't like that. And then later on, when he's in prison and starts his hunger strikes and doing these theatrical things, his other lover debuts their illegitimate child on TV who's like, hi daddy, or something like that. And it's like, literally,
hell yeah, that's awesome.
What is happening? It's like a telenovela, like you have Saakashvili and his entire force are his lovers and wives and stuff. Like that's his entire like staff. It's like all these women willing to like die for this man, do everything.
Yeah, he actually died in season 3 and came back.
But that's the entire staff of your lovers and illegitimate children because it's now Southern European familia. Familia.
Yeah.
We keep it in the family. This is wonderful. I did not know any of this about Saakashvili. I'm not going to lie. I have been distracted by the blinding lights of the Ivanishvili family. I could not see the beauty right in front of me.
Yes,
of Saakashvili.
They're so boring compared to Misha is the star. Okay.
Yeah, that's fair. I see this now. Bidzina, I'm sorry. Move over, Bidzina.
So yeah, but one thing you alluded to earlier that like maybe with the Saakashvili comeback is like part of the topic is the like a certain kind of continuity between these administrations, right? Like if Saakashvili, like the rhetoric is one thing and maybe the like political punditry, I don't know the right word, is another thing. But an example you brought up a couple times in your writing is this liberty law, I think it's called, with the like outlawing progressive taxation. It's really like really regressive tax regime and really like strictly codified. That was another very blunt Saakashvili quote. I don't remember it exactly. Like, yes, the point is to straitjacket the country so that they can't change these tax laws. But then that's codified in the Constitution under the Georgian Dream. And so, like, what is like? First of all, like, what is the continuity? Like, what isn't continuous between the parties, and how is Saakashvili? Is there any change? Will it be going back? Can he just pick up where Georgian Dream left off? Like, what? Where can we see this going forward?
Yeah. So, 1 second. Sorry, my cat is destroying something. 1 second.
The star of the show.
We've loved your cats.
Yeah,
contributions.
We've been enjoying the cat. We have to keep all of this in now because we've mentioned the cat.
Yes.
She like.
I was never going to edit the cat out.
Yeah.
I know that.
She just keeps playing with the like bags and it's so loud. So, so I always think Georgian Dream is like the exact same politics of Saakashvili, but without the zealot frontman, and they just do things in a very boring way, but they continue the neoliberalism, and they just do maybe a little bit dash of, more European association agreement kind of stuff, So, so they carried on. We fought really hard against that. When the new constitution was being written, we worked really hard to get that Liberty Act out. So we had a whole campaign and people were involved. And the best that we had was like, maybe in 7 years it'll expire. But like, they didn't want to spook business. And at the end of the day, like Bidzina, like, Ivanishvili and Georgian Dream, like believes in this free market, very let the free market decide kind of politics.
Yeah.
And so they are against progressive taxation. I don't think they have the knowledge or the ideology not to have any of those things. So Georgian Dream is just, I always say, less repressive version as well, So they're the police here, despite whatever the opposition says, and there has been a couple of incidents. I mean, I come from the U.S. where the police are like terrifying. Like when I see a policeman in the U.S., I'm just like, okay, he's going to kill me. Like they're very cruel and they can get away with just anything. Georgian police are like so nice comparatively. I'm just like, I've never seen police that nice. So I don't know, like maybe I come from a very, different experience where everybody just seems a lot less repressive. But I've personally never felt like threatened by Georgian police as others. So during Saakashvili, they were much more repressive and they were sort of locking up all these people, all these young men. There was rumors of rape. There were videos, actually, not just rumors, videos of rape. So he was a very, again, you have to enact these free market principles and what I also call primitive accumulation. You have to have very authoritarian, repressive mechanisms to do it because people just are not going to do it otherwise, They're just not going to give up a lot of their lands or their houses or, be coerced into things without a fight. So I think the repression is always like comes with a package of neoliberal reforms. In some ways, Georgian Dream had the luxury, since Saakashvili had already done so many of the reform packets, right? They didn't have to have the repressive mechanism because Saakashvili already did it. So they were just already riding on all the things that were already done with Saakashvili, because Saakashvili got everybody used to free market things pretty quickly, actually. I'm always surprised how easily Georgian politicians are able to keep people in line or bring them back in line or get them used to stuff. I always think that people are going to protest a lot more, and it just doesn't happen. Any of the protests that really do happen in Georgia have been around, mostly mobilizing around drug legalization, because it was like mainly a nightclub that was doing it, against like being like, hey, people want to do drugs and like hang out and it's great for tourism, like that was a big thing.
Wrote a song about that. That's the only political stance Bera has taken.
It's legalized.
Is legalize it. Yeah.
Exactly, right?
Oh my God.
And it's been against Russian whatever. It was a Russian MP sitting on a chair in parliament that was mobilized. Huge amounts of people were mobilized during Ukraine war. Right now it's been mobilized. So every time there's been a huge mobilization, it's been mostly about political parties, the opposition organizing, and it's usually around using anti-Russia sentiments, which they have helped to develop, of course, to then channel into political demands they'll make. Like, oh, now we want these and these demands that have nothing to do with the initial protest, but about something that's going to give them a leg up, in the government.
Fair enough. I think that's we have anything else we need to talk about with sorry, I put in the notes pictures of the what looked like bus stops with the NATO flag on it.
Foreign policy priority is the integration into.
That's Gucci. That's the Libertarian Party.
Oh, towards the end,
true, yeah.
That was a very because they're like anti-lockdown. Yes, it was a very strange
party. Very popular here.
Yeah.
Oh, one thing actually, I did need to ask in terms of because I've heard you mention this before, but like for people who don't understand the context of Georgia, you do have a flat tax.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Of I believe 20% on all incomes.
Yes. And VAT is 18%. So most people are paying that plus 2% of pensions. About 40% is what most people are actually paying because they're spending all of their paycheck because it's so little the wages are. So they're getting double taxed actually.
That's fair. So I think
I have a question to ask that if no one else has a question, because it's only tangentially related to Georgian politics. And I wasn't going to ask it, but I was going through Twitter and I saw several comments about Kanye West.
I love Kanye
And since we've talked about certain...
You're in good company with Rob.
You have no idea. I have this whole theory about Kanye West and Putin and how Kim Kardashian is Ukraine.
I read... Wait, I didn't know the Ukraine part. So I just read the quote about him saying that he is Putin because culture is oil.
Yeah.
What is the Kim angle?
Okay, so I had this. So right before, that's because
Rob
I followed
so
this stuff
happy.
too closely. I've been wanting to tell this someone for so long. So right before Russia invaded Ukraine, so Kanye was having his like crazy moments where he was like, obsessively trying to go after Kim. And so he was like, he's like, Kimberly, run back to me and stuff like that. Right. And Kim was like with a new guy, Pete. Right. And so
Davidson.
he's like, he wouldn't stop. Then he started attacking Pete, and all Kim's friends, like nonstop on like Instagram, like going crazy. If you saw it, like he was posting like every 2 minutes and writing crazy stuff. And right before that, he was with Julia Fox. He was trying to like sort of use as muse or whatever, but like again, that didn't work out.
Uncut Gems.
Yeah, exactly. And then like he made that video where he like cut off the head, buried alive Pete and then cut off his head and stuff. And he was like, it's art. And so my whole thing was like, Putin was like, Ukraine was like Kimberly. And he was like, so Putin was like, that speech was like, run back to me, Kimberly. Like that speech about Ukraine he gave right before he invaded. And that was sort of like Kanye's thing. And then I also joked, and Georgians are going to kill me, but I was like, I guess Georgia found out they were the Julia Fox of the relationship and not Kimberly because clearly he was all about Ukraine and like not so much Georgia. And then he like because he couldn't get like, Kimberly back, he starts attacking just like, I mean, again, this is like, I hate to degrade this like war into this thing, but like in like pop cultural thing that was
no,
fine.
it's
I apologize to anyone. I don't mean to be insensitive. No, it's just like,
I think it's very fitting in a way.
Half our audience are people who will get mad, and the other half are people who will thank you for explaining it this way. It helps them understand better.
Yeah, but he really did start like a culture war right before it, like because he started naming all this like other artists as well, and everybody got pissed and took sides. And do you remember he even posted like this whole thing where he like had one team thing? And when one team versus second.
Fallout with Kid Cudi over this. What?
I don't know. Whichever team Future's on, I'm on that team.
Future's on no team, but
I think he's on the thing. I think he's on Kanye's team.
Oh yeah, he's on that. Because they started hanging out after the whole divorce, like and the breakup stuff.
That's right. Yeah, good company.
That's the best company.
Kazakhstan. You're with me. No, the reason, Lennon made Kim Kardashian break up with Kanye, by the way. The reason I ask about it is because we've been talking about Bera a little bit, the rapping son of the
Georgia's
richest
man, yeah.
And we've talked about a certain clown of a character in Saakashvili, and they're using like Saakashvili will, part of whatever his political comeback is, will be about using geopolitical, like actual war for, his theater. And of course, then we have like when that's the actual state of politics, it's only natural for, a somewhat observant performer like Kanye to be like, why don't I just incorporate the geopolitics into my whole ongoing performance in media. So it was very fitting, I thought. I think he sees. I'm looking forward to more comparisons. That's all I'll say.
Well, another one I'll say, Kanye single-handedly brought Kim and Balenciaga Demna, Georgian designer, and Armenian muse together, and they've become the most unstoppable like pop culture, whatever, trendsetters, designer,
I
whatever.
hate this.
And that's an Armenian Georgian connection right there.
Yeah.
Oh.
The only thing I remember is I'm a massive freak for the Eurovision Song Contest. I will watch the like national selection competitions, and the only thing I remember from like the last handful of years of like Armenia's national selection competition is every young woman in Armenia has basically decided, oh yeah, Kim, the Kardashians. This is how we do it. They all are just doing the big back ponytail, the heavy mascara. They've just figured it out, and they're just like, oh, this is what we do. Cool.
She's like Stalin.
She is. It's funny. I like dissed Kim. I just said she's an oligarch, and like people were like got mad at me. Like right, I could say all this stuff about like Russia or Ukraine or whatever. Almost no one comments. Oh, yeah. Like I say anything about Kim, and they're like, she's trying her best. She's the best.
No, it's nothing until you bring up Beyonce or like one of the members of BDS in Korea, like the people who support those.
I thought you were talking about BDS.
What am I talking?
Palestinian.
Yeah. Well, also actually BTS.
Yeah.
But also there's a lot of people. If you bring up BDS, there's a lot of people who will get mad at you as well. Yeah.
But for other reasons.
For other racist reasons.
Yes.
But yeah. The beehive is also terrifying. Yeah. You can say whatever you want about the Russian-Ukraine conflict.
Barbs are also pretty bad too.
Barbs, yeah.
Yeah, the Nicki Minaj stands.
Yeah. Oh yeah, true.
Yeah.
Such a weird way we've ended this episode about Georgia.
But the stands, there really is like armies of people now dedicated to stars or whatever. It's a really weird, strange world.
I don't want to put too fine a point on it, but like the other half of this dynamic is that, let's say something like nationalism, that's completely drained of like a national project, is just stan culture. It's like stan politics. It's like, why you just stan?
Exactly.
I stand by nation.
I stand
nothing else to it.
The concept of Georgia I have in my head that was probably never real to begin with. Yeah.
But on a serious note, like I felt very uncomfortable in Georgia being here last 2 weeks. Like it's so tense and xenophobic, nationalistic. I have not seen it like this bad. It's made me very uncomfortable, nervous. I see all these like so-called leftists posting things and saying things I would never imagined they would. So it's a very like, I can only imagine what that's going to be like in Ukraine. Like it's going to be a very ugly world, especially for anything left next few years, even more. I'm not looking forward to it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it seems like a push, like for Ukraine right now, like what we are like experiencing, to like super far right nationalism, etc. I mean, if you look at how they wouldn't even celebrate International Women's Day, like you had like some like university students calling
it a Soviet holiday.
Yeah, so calling it a Soviet holiday, and like it's like this revival of everything that is, Soviet is Russian and is bad, therefore. So any kind of labor holiday, unions.
I say this as I draw the black sun on everything.
We're already getting some good reports of like pro-Russian, pro-Putin being like weaponized against the left in like Bulgaria and stuff like that. So
He even did like a letter to the Western left.
oh, for
Putin?
Yeah. He did like
Okay.
a recent I don't know, remember if it was like a press conference or speech or whatever, but he like criticized the Western left for not supporting him.
Oh, for fuck's sake! I hate this world.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the big letter that we didn't read in the last episode.
I don't want to.
Yeah. Sorry that we that I ended it on a little bit of a ridiculous note than on that one.
Yeah. No, it's going to get grim, and that farcical example of it is also really grim. But to wrap things up, thank you so much, Sopo, for coming on and guiding us through the wonderful recent history of, I want to say Georgia, but I feel like it's mostly of Saakashvili. He's so enigmatic. Where can people find you and your work?
Well, you can listen to my podcast, Reimagining Soviet Georgia, where we try to discuss Soviet period of Georgia, even though we did a 2008 episode, but we try to focus mostly on the Soviet period. And I hope that a lot of people can learn and appreciate the really rich Soviet history. And other than that, I'm a labor union leader here, and I mostly organize workers and strikes and so on. So I can be on Twitter if you're interested. I get a lot of criticism.
We'll put links to your Twitter, your podcast, and your writing in the show notes. And I guess the general shout out is, if you are in Georgia, join a union. Join Sopo's union. Maybe you can't, but why not?
Thank you for that.
And with that, we will say goodbye and see you on Friday. Ciao, ciao.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you.